OmegaForce. They're a company that has made a name for themselves for their warrior/Musou games, and have been around for a while, but have really started to make a big name for themselves in more recent years, at least in the West. Due to them taking on other companies' IPs and giving them the Warriors treatment, they've been getting more and more attention, and more fans, and rightfully so. Despite consistent issues from game to game, such as repetitiveness and annoying grinding, the overall quality of their product seems not only to be top-notch, but may even be increasing with each release. And today, I'm here to argue that OmegaForce is actually a company with fantastic developers that are greatly held back by essentially making the same game over and over. Allow me to make my case. OmegaForce didn't always just do Warriors games. Yes, their first game back in 1997 was still Dynasty Warriors, but all you had to do is actually look at the game for a couple seconds to see that this is not the Warriors game that we are used to. Yep, the very first Warriors game, a series known for being a hack and slash with a massive amount of enemies, started out as a 1v1 fighting game. It was kind of similar to Soul Calibur, being a weapon-based 3D fighting game. It seemed to be well received at the time, so it's already off to a good start. You'd think that the next game would of course be the sequel, right? In actuality, it would take 3 years before Dynasty Warriors 2 to be released, and there were 3 completely different games released in that time frame. Enigma, which is an adventure game that has many gameplay similarities to Resident Evil, Destrega is a 3D arena fighter, and Winback, which is a third-person shooter. Already, that's 2 to 3 different genre games with completely different styles of gameplay, so the very early games from the developer are already starting off strong. Unfortunately, despite showing great variety early on, the rest of OmegaForce's repertoire consists of mostly the Warriors games that everyone is familiar with. I'm not saying that the Warriors games are bad, but having essentially the same 2 franchises that play very similar for years and years on end, things could get stale and creativity could plummet. Once in a while, OmegaForce shows that they do have the potential to work on other types of games, or at least put a spin on the same kind of gameplay that they've mastered. For instance, Bladestorm, The 100 Years' War, is a game that came out in 2007, and on the surface, it looks like another Warriors game with a different title, but look past that and it is way more of a strategy game than an action game. In 2010, they made a game called Trinity, Souls of Zil-Ul, oh god, Jesus Christ, that name, which is an action RPG with combat and mechanics that are not like a Warriors game at all. So they clearly had the potential to make varying games with different genres and styles of play, but given how popular Musou games are, that's not something we'll see too often, if at all anymore. Thankfully, it seems that OmegaForce found a bit of a way around this, and this is where I argue that this company is really good. Warriors games were always fairly niche in the West, but they still had their dedicated followings. However, I'd argue that Hyrule Warriors was the start of people realizing how fun these games can be. While there have been crossover games before, such as Dynasty Warriors Gundam and One Piece Pirate Warriors, they didn't really do too much in making Warriors games big in the West. While still mostly a Warriors game with a Zelda skin, there were some aspects that helped it to make it feel unique, and still feel like a Zelda game, albeit one that doesn't work in a traditional way. You still need to find or earn key items, you still need heart tanks, you still need to use items to do great damage on bosses, etc. There's not much in terms of puzzles, with the closest thing being fighting gold Skulltulas. And the fact that the team was able to take characters that had no combat abilities at all, and make them full-on combatants, and just to be able to make characters' movesets as creative as they are, shows that they can do much more than just wars based on real history. And as for OmegaForce's potential to make more than just the same game over and over, they originally pitched the game to be way more traditional. While the full details of what this means was never publicly disclosed to my knowledge, I always interpreted this as a normal 3D Zelda game pre-Breath of the Wild, but the combat rooms would have way more enemies than normal. The only reason that this is a Warriors game is because Miyamoto wanted them to play to their strengths and do what they know. While they will still make traditional Dynasty and Samurai Warriors games, their overall quality seemed to vary from title to title, with Dynasty Warriors 9 being seen as one of the worst ones in recent memory. Their licensed games, however, seem to be getting more and more praise from release to release. Not every one of their licensed games are amazing though. The Fist of the North Star games are kind of meh, and I have a whole video on Berserk Warriors. But for the most part, their licensed Warriors games have gotten very positive receptions. Admittedly, I don't know much about Dragon Quest or the Warriors spin-offs of them, but they have gotten good reviews and play more like action RPGs than a traditional Warriors game. Sure, you still have staple elements such as lots of enemies on screen, characters talking during gameplay, a map with enemies spread all around, etc. But the gameplay has a lot of RPG elements from the original series that really mix up the gameplay. Fire Emblem Warriors has a bit more of a strategy element, bringing over its rock, paper, scissors mechanic and adapting them into a Musou game. You can also set up characters and order them around the map in a similar fashion to the original series. Some characters are also not playable on foot, but ride horses or dragons, which is not only similar to the original games, but gives some variety to gameplay styles, so that not everyone feels the same, which helps a lot since people wield the same or similar weapons anyway. Age of Calamity does share some similarities with the original Hyrule Warriors, with some characters returning, and keeping the weakness mechanic from the last game, but the rest of the game is all new. The characters and levels are only from Breath of the Wild, and each one of them gets access to the Sheikah Slate and uses them in unique ways. Each character plays in a completely unique way, with pretty much no similarities between them. It also helps that each character has their own special gimmick, such as Urbosa being able to extend her combos with powerful lightning attacks, or Sidon having stronger versions of his attacks if you time them right. It feels like a combat-focused Breath of the Wild, more than a Breath of the Wild DLC expansion for Hyrule Warriors. This is all just scratching the surface though. While these games are unique in their own ways, they are still Musou games at the end of the day, so even though you can see the potential, because of how familiar they are, it just seems like OmegaForce is doing the same old thing like always from an outside perspective. However, there are two games I want to argue that show that OmegaForce can have fantastic spins on Warriors games, or have the potential to make more unique games more frequently that get great attention. The first one is Persona 5 Strikers. Persona 5 Strikers is one of the best examples of a Warriors game that doesn't really feel or even look like a Warriors game. You can see how flexible and creative OmegaForce can be. It's just a Persona game. Seriously. While quite a bit more linear than Persona 5, this game is just another Persona game. In fact, compared to other licensed Warriors games, where they are adaptations of certain stories or spin-off stories that are not canon to the original series, Strikers is a direct sequel to Persona 5, and to my knowledge, is canon. The biggest differences between Persona 5 and Strikers is the gameplay. Yes, it is more action-based, but if anything, it is more of an action RPG than a Warriors action game, somewhat similar to Dragon Quest Heroes. There may be more enemies on screen than what Persona 5 allows, but not by much. There are not hundreds of enemies on screen at once. It has the same mechanics, such as Persona fusing and all-out attacks and the like, but just not turn-based. You still have strategic elements, such as choosing which Persona to take with you and which ones are best for certain situations, and the game will even slow down as you select what you do. There are also stealth and platforming. Yeah, stealth and platforming in OmegaForce Warriors game. It's not the most in-depth, but just having these drastically increases the uniqueness. I really doubt the Warriors games would do anything like this normally. There are even great non-combat gameplay elements, such as wandering around Japan and strengthening bonds with party members. It's not a Warriors game with a Persona skin. It is a Persona game, and while it can still have the repetitive and grindy nature, there is no way that this is just your average Musou game, and this shows that OmegaForce can make much more unique games should they be given the chance. The second example is the Attack on Titan game. It still has repetitive gameplay. It's still grindy. It still has the characters talking over gameplay, and you still have to go over the map to kill enemies. But the gameplay and mechanics are so vastly different that this doesn't even qualify as a Warriors game. All you really have to do is look at the gameplay to see how completely different this is. The gameplay is not slashing at a ton of enemies. It is flying around one enemy at a time, planning where to strike, and attacking where you've weakened an enemy or finding an opening. You need to plan your attacks for each enemy. As you get used to the game, it does move much faster and things get easier. But the fact that gameplay takes a while to get used to, and you can't really just button mash the whole game, is clearly different from every Warriors game. Hell, until you get used to the controls, the base enemies can be a serious threat. The starting enemies in an OmegaForce game can be a threat. The base gameplay is like if Spider-Man was a murderer. So, Zack Snyder's dream version of Spider-Man. The gameplay is so different and unique that it shows what OmegaForce can do when not tied down to the monotony of Musou. Okay, it still has horseback riding, but otherwise the gameplay is not like a Warriors game at all. You also have to keep track of your supplies so that you don't run out. Yeah, you don't have some giant all-powerful weapon, you have limited supplies per mission. Yeah, you can gain more, but abuse it and there goes the whole mission. Even if you don't like Attack on Titan, you should be able to clearly see how different of a Warriors game this is, and if my other examples didn't prove what OmegaForce can do, this most certainly does. If anything, even if people don't see how OmegaForce can do more than just Warriors games, they at least realize that they can do franchise-based Warriors adaptations really well. We've gotten to a point where people are contemplating what franchises they want to see made into a Warriors game. It's gotten that big. We actually want to see more franchises in this style of play because they're that fun and creative. We should get more Warriors games, but I feel that we should also get more unique IPs from the company, like when they first started. We do get some once in a while, but they're so infrequent, and these hypothetical games could really show what the team of OmegaForce can do when they're not shackled into making the same kind of game over and over. It can be like Game Freak and their Gear Project initiative, but, good. Give the team adequate time and money to make something more unique before putting them back into the Warriors cycle, but also allow Warriors games to be more and more unique as time goes on. I feel that lots of good can come from that, and I hope that more people start to see that OmegaForce is a great game development company. While there have been crossover games before, such as Dynasty Warriors Gundam and One Piece Pirate Warriors, they didn't really... I'm so bad at this, always bad at this. My fake crying sucks too. You still need to find or earn key items. You still need heart tanks. You still need to use items to do... While the full details of what this means was never publicly... While they would still make traditional Dynasty and Samurai Warriors games, their overall quality seemed to vary from title to title, with Dynasty Warriors 9 being seen as one of the worst ones in recent memory. Their licensed games, however, voice crack, let me try that again.